The oven timer was going off when my brother walked in and told me my services were no longer needed. That was the phrase he used. My services. Like I had been a contractor hired off Craigslist, not the person who had spent the last 6 years keeping his restaurant from drowning in its own debt. He didn't look at me when he said it. He was scrolling through his phone, leaning against the doorframe of the back office. And the way he said it so casual, so practiced, told me he had been rehearsing it for a while. Probably in the car on the way over. Maybe in the shower that morning. I remember thinking, that's a lot of effort for 11 words. I turned the oven timer off. I didn't say anything. He said my sister-in-law was going to be handling operations going forward. She had taken an online business course. 14 weeks, he told me, as if the number was supposed to mean something. 14 weeks and a certificate printed on cardstock, versus 6 years of me rebuilding what he had nearly run into the ground twice. I nodded. I asked if I could finish out the week to wrap up the vendor contracts. He said sure, whatever, and walked back out to the dining floor. I stood in that back office for about 3 minutes. I looked at the whiteboard on the wall, the one I had filled with the quarterly schedule, the health inspection prep checklist, the contact numbers for every supplier we used, my handwriting, every single line of it. I took a photo of it with my phone. Then I picked up my bag and went home 4 hours early. That was a Tuesday. I want to back up, because if I just tell you about the ending, you won't understand the full weight of what happened. And I think the weight is the important part. My name is not relevant. What matters is that I am 31 years old. I have a finance degree I paid for myself through scholarships and night shifts at a grocery store, and I have a brother who is 5 years older than me and has believed his entire life that he was born to be in charge of things. Not because he is good at being in charge of things, but because he is the oldest, and he is a man. And in my family, those two facts were always treated like a divine appointment. My parents opened a small Italian restaurant when I was 12. My brother was 17. From the beginning, my father ran the kitchen, and my mother ran the front of house, and my brother was supposed to learn the business so he could take it over someday. That was the plan. That was always the plan. The problem was that my brother had no interest in the parts of running a business that were not glamorous. He liked greeting regulars. He liked comping meals for people he wanted to impress. He liked telling people he was a restaurateur. He did not like vendor negotiations, payroll compliance, state tax filings, health code documentation, or the 1,000 invisible administrative tasks that keep a small business from getting fined, audited, or shut down. When I graduated and came back home, my parents asked if I could help out for a little while, just temporarily, just until things stabilized. I said yes. Of course I said yes. It was family. That was 6 years ago. Within the first month, I found 3 separate billing errors with our food suppliers that had been overcharging us for 11 months. I renegotiated 2 of our vendor contracts and saved us almost $14,000 annually. I set up a proper bookkeeping system to replace the spiral notebook my mother had been using. I filed the back tax documents that had been sitting in a folder marked "Deal with this" for 2 years. My parents were grateful. My brother was not particularly interested in any of it. He was interested in expanding. He wanted a second location. He talked about it constantly at family dinners, at Sunday lunches, at random Tuesday mornings when he would call me before I had finished my coffee. He had a vision. He had ideas. What he did not have was any understanding of whether the first location could financially support an expansion, which it could not, which I told him approximately 9 times over the course of 3 years. He went ahead and signed a lease anyway. He did not tell me until after. I spent 4 months fixing the cash flow problems that created. I didn't sleep much during those 4 months. I kept a notebook by my bed because I would wake up at 2 in the morning, remembering something that needed to be done before a filing deadline. Nobody in my family asked how I was doing during those 4 months. My brother texted me twice, both times to ask if I had handled something specific. My parents were focused on the new location. My sister-in-law, who had been around for about 2 years by then, made a comment at Easter that I seemed stressed and maybe I needed to find a hobby. I smiled and passed the bread. The thing that people who have never been the invisible backbone of something do not understand is that it stops feeling like a choice after a while. You do not decide every morning to be the person who holds everything together. You just become that person, slowly, the way a path gets worn into grass, step by step. And then one day the path is just there, and everyone walks on it without thinking about who made it. I was the path. My brother was the one who told people where to go. About 2 years before that Tuesday, I started noticing something shift. My sister-in-law began spending more time at the restaurant. At first, I thought this was good. I thought maybe she genuinely wanted to learn the business, and that would mean I could step back a little, breathe, maybe actually use some of the vacation days I had been accumulating. But she was not learning the business. She was learning how to present herself as the person running it. There is a difference. She learned the names of the regulars my mother had cultivated for 20 years and introduced herself as the manager. She started sitting in on vendor calls I ran and asking questions that would have been answered if she had read the documents I sent her. She reorganized the front office filing system in a way that made sense aesthetically and no other way. And when I could not find the insurance renewal forms for 3 days because of it, she told me she thought I was overreacting. I started keeping copies of everything. Not because I suspected what was coming, just because something in me, some quiet and careful part said, document this. I am a finance person. Documentation is a reflex. I kept a folder on my laptop. Contracts I had negotiated, with the before and after numbers. Email threads showing problems I had caught and resolved before they became crises. The tax filing confirmations. The vendor communications. The health inspection prep materials I had built from scratch after we got cited 3 years earlier. The payroll records I had restructured to bring us into compliance. 6 years of invisible work, organized by date, saved in a folder. I named something boring so no one would ever click on it by accident. I did not know why I was saving it. I just knew that I should. The family dinner was about a month before that Tuesday. My parents, my brother and his wife, my grandmother and me. It was a Sunday. My mother made lasagna, which is funny in retrospect, because my brother had been talking about adding a new lasagna to the restaurant menu and asking me to price out the ingredients, and I had been doing exactly that the morning of the dinner. My brother announced over dinner that he and my sister-in-law had been talking, and they had decided it was time for the restaurant to have a clearer management structure. He said this like it was a neutral business observation, the way you might say the weather is getting cooler. My sister-in-law nodded in the way she always did when he was saying something she had told him to say. He said he thought my sister-in-law should be the official operations manager, that she had really stepped up, that she had a real eye for the customer experience side of things. My grandmother said that sounded wonderful, and wasn't it nice that the family was growing into the business together? My mother looked at me for a fraction of a second, and then looked at her plate. My father asked if anyone wanted more garlic bread. I said that sounded like a great idea, and asked my brother if he wanted me to put together a transition document so my sister-in-law would have everything she needed. He said, sure. Yeah, that would be helpful. I ate my lasagna. I drove home. I sat in my car in my driveway for a while. Then I went inside and started updating the folder. I added a transition document, a real one, a thorough one, 43 pages that covered every system, every vendor relationship, every compliance deadline, every recurring task, every account login, every contract renewal date for the next 18 months. I wrote it clearly and completely, the way I would write anything I wanted someone to actually be able to use. I also wrote a second document, a shorter one, a summary of my contributions over 6 years, with numbers, specific numbers, the billing errors I had caught and what they would have cost us if I hadn't, the contract renegotiations and what they saved annually, the tax issues I had resolved and what the penalties would have been, the cash flow restructuring I had done after the second location mistake, and the precise amount by which I had reduced our outstanding liability over 18 months. I did not plan to show anyone that document. I just needed to write it. I needed to see, in plain numbers, what the last 6 years had actually been. The total was not a small number. I saved both documents. I went to bed. The Tuesday my brother came in and told me my services were no longer needed. I finished out the week. I did what I said I would do. I wrapped up the open vendor negotiations not all the way. just enough that nothing would fall through immediately. I labeled everything clearly. I left the transition document on the office desk, printed and bound. I did not leave the second document. On my last day, my mother hugged me and said she hoped I understood that this was just business, that it wasn't personal. I told her I understood completely. My brother was not there. He had a golf thing. I cleaned out my desk. I had very little there, actually. Most of what I brought to that job, I carried in my head. I drove home. I updated my resume for the first time in 6 years. I emailed 3 people I had stayed in contact with professionally. People who knew my work, people who had offered me things before that I had always declined because I was too needed at the restaurant. One of them emailed back within 2 hours. The job offer came through 11 days later. The salary was 40% higher than what I had been making at the restaurant, which, I should tell you, was already below market rate, because I had agreed to take a reduced salary during the lean years and then somehow never gotten around to renegotiating it. The position was at a mid-sized hospitality group. They needed someone to oversee multi-location financial operations. I had, as it turned out, been doing exactly that for 6 years. I accepted the offer on a Thursday. On that same Thursday evening, my phone rang. It was my brother. He had been trying to reach me a few times over the previous week and a half texts. A couple of calls I had let go to voicemail. The voicemails were short and vague. Hey, just checking in. Call me when you get a chance. The kind of message that tries to sound casual but has something tightening underneath it. I answered this time. He did not say hello. He said, "The state sent something about our quarterly filing. I don't know what it is." I said, "Okay." He said, "Can you handle it?" I was quiet for a moment. Not dramatically. I just needed a second to be sure I was going to say what I meant to say, and not something else. I said, "I don't work there anymore." He said he knew that, but this was a time-sensitive thing, and my sister-in-law was still getting up to speed, and it would just take me an hour. I said, "The deadline and the instructions for responding are both in the transition document, page 31. There's also a contact number for the accountant I used last year. She's familiar with our filing history." He said, "Yeah, but it would be easier if you just—" I said, "Page 31. There was a pause. He said my name. He said it the way people say your name when they want it to feel significant, when they want you to understand that some kind of appeal is being made. I said, "Good luck with the filing." I hung up. My phone buzzed 4 more times that evening. I did not answer. I made myself dinner, which was a thing I had time to do now, and watched something I had been meaning to watch for months, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. My sister-in-law texted me 2 days later. The text was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph was about how much she respected everything I had done for the family. The second paragraph was about how the restaurant was going through an adjustment period, and it would really mean a lot if I could just be available for questions. The third paragraph was about how family was family. I read it twice. I did not respond. Over the following 3 weeks, I heard things through my mother, who was the one person who kept calling me consistently. Not to ask me to come back just to talk. I think she understood, on some level, that she had let something happen that she should not have let happen. She did not say that directly, but she called more than she used to. And she asked about my new job with a kind of careful attention that felt like an apology she didn't know how to give yet. I learned that the quarterly filing issue had resulted in a late penalty. Not catastrophic, but not small. I learned that one of the major vendors I had been renegotiating with had finalized a less favorable contract because the process had stalled when I left. I learned that 2 of the long-term staff members had given notice, both of them people I had hired and trained, and who had been, I think, more loyal to the work I had built than to the name on the sign out front. I learned that the second location, the one my brother had opened over my objections 3 years ago, was struggling significantly. The cash flow structure I had put in place was still technically intact, but it required consistent maintenance, ongoing adjustments, someone who understood why each piece was there. Without that, it was like a sandcastle at low tide. My brother called again. 4 weeks after that first call. This time, his voice was different. The casual performance was gone. He said he needed to talk. He said things were harder than expected. He said he may have been too hasty. He said my name, again, but this time it didn't sound practiced. It sounded tired. He asked if I would consider coming back. I had thought about what I would say in this moment. I had actually sat with it, turned it over, tried to be honest with myself about what I wanted, not what would feel satisfying in the short term, what I actually wanted, going forward, for my own life. I said, I have a job I like. I'm not available. He said he would make it worth my while this time, that things would be different, that he realized now what I had been contributing. I said, I know you do. He waited for me to say something else. I said, I really do hope things work out. I mean that. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said my name again, quieter. I said I had to go, and I did. I have not been back to the restaurant. I have spoken to my mother regularly, and I had dinner with my parents, just them, about 6 weeks ago. My father, who is not a man of many words, told me over dinner that he was proud of me. He said it simply, looking at the table, the way people say things they have been holding for a long time. I did not make a big deal of it. I just said thank you. I think about the second document sometimes, the one with the numbers, the one no one ever saw. I think about what it would have meant to show it, whether that would have changed anything, whether the point was ever really about being recognized by them, or whether the point was something else entirely. I think the point was for me to see it, to know what it was worth, so that when my brother used the phrase my services, I already knew, in precise and documented terms, exactly what those services had been, so that I could walk out of that office without needing anyone in that room to understand what they had just lost. I kept the document. It lives in a folder on my laptop, still named something boring. Occasionally I open it, not to feel righteous about it, but just to remember. It is the record of 6 years I gave to something, because I loved the people it belonged to, even when those people could not see me clearly enough to love me back in the same language. I framed something, actually, not the document. A single line from it, a small post-it note I had written to myself in the second month of the cash flow crisis, when I was awake at 2 a.m. trying to save something that was not technically mine to save. The note said, "You know what this is worth, even if they don't." It's on my desk at the new job. Nobody has ever asked about it. Nobody needs to.